This interview is brought to you in association with Rabobank.
Hi, thanks for joining me for this Rural Delivery website interview. I'm Roger Bourne and today I'm speaking with Hayley Moynihan, New Zealand General Manager of Country Banking for Rabobank. Hayley, good to speak to you again.
Hello, Roger.
Look, 2016, bit of a mixed bag across the board for the primary sectors overall. What's your take?
2016 really has been hard going for a number of sectors within agriculture and agribusiness. Really the highlight has been for horticulture, almost across the board, which has been good for those in that sector, and particularly given the high currency. Of course, dairies had a rough few years, and I think the other pastoral sectors sit somewhere in between those two, but certainly hasn't been an easy year.
Now, let's dig a bit deeper in horticulture. Why? Why now?
It's been a combination of recovery from the depths of PSA in the case of kiwi fruit. I think the industry across a number of different subsectors has done a good job of investing in future varieties, and there I'm thinking about both apples and kiwi fruit, and markets have generally been buoyant, so a whole combination of things, but it has been really reaping the rewards of investment that was actually undertaken some time ago.
Yep, so really good R&D. Another thing I'd observe in that sector, a very strong connection with the consumer, a real understanding of the products that people want to buy, and a very close look at the sort of production chains and the value chains that get them there. You see that also?
Absolutely, and hence the R&D has gone into the right places. Yep. And I think that's been critical in terms of the success that we've then seen over the last couple of years.
Albeit, though, not huge sectors in terms of their overall impact for New Zealand. How much room do you see for growth within those sectors? Say, we've got wine, kiwi fruit, apples, for example. Then we've got new things, avocados growing. A lot of talk about berry fruit.
Yeah, certainly a lot of potential for growth. And it is region-specific in New Zealand, so that does mean limitations in terms of land availability. But interestingly, now starting to see those sectors compete with perhaps some of our more traditional sectors for that land use. And I think that's healthy for New Zealand Inc. and healthy for agribusiness and horticultural businesses across the board. Competition for land use does drive efficiency and certainly drives productivity. So I think that's a really positive sign, and that there is room for future growth in those sectors.
Now, dairy sector, yes, it's made all the headlines this year, probably for all the wrong reasons. We've seen a bit of a firming up in prices and GDT over the last couple of months, which is good news. When would we even start dreaming about growth again, rather than simply just sort of getting back on an even keel?
Yeah, look, I think it's certainly still a recovery story rather than, back to where the sector was a few years ago. I think we'll still see growth in pockets, but I think it is unlikely that we will see the widespread growth in the sector that we saw over the last decade and a half, really. And that's due to a number of factors, the competing land use we just spoke about, but also the environmental pressures that are out there. And it does mean that I think more discerning investment in land use and thinking about the best and highest return for that land means that dairy won't necessarily be the automatic choice that it was 10 years ago. So that will have impacts on growth, and I think it will mean we see a much slower rate of growth in milk production going forward.
Is that another way of saying peak dairy, Hayley?
Look, it's potentially peak cows. I think peak production can be quite a different thing in terms of productivity, but that's where the last few years, despite clearly the difficulties for the industry, farmers and producers are now thinking more critically about that, and I think that's a good sign, rather than chasing production, which has been a feature of the industry and has helped the industry grow to be very successful. So there's certainly no denying that, but actually thinking about what peak profitability looks like for the industry is a much better way to look at that. And I think that may mean that we look at more production per cow, clearly smarter and more efficient production systems. And it may mean we haven't seen peak milk, but perhaps we've seen peak land area and peak cows.
This recovery that we've seen, or stabilisation around prices, really supply-led, isn't it? It's a contracting of supply that's causing that. Is that correct?
It is, yeah, and virtually globally from the major exporting nations, with the exception of the US, although while their production's been increasing, they certainly haven't been exporting more. So it's about the volume of products spilling onto world markets, which has clearly contracted from New Zealand, from Australia, from the European Union primarily, and Latin America. So it is a supply story. What we can't lose sight of, though, is that demand has been ticking away quietly and steadily, and we need that to happen as well. So it isn't that demand fell away, just that the volume of product available outpaced it. So we've still got demand steady, and the contraction in supply is what's supporting prices now. So that is at least a more sustainable recovery than the short-term lift in prices that we saw this time last year.
Now, while dairy farmers have been down, they've frankly had a bit of a kicking in a couple of areas. We've seen just recently another piece on animal welfare. There's been waters come to the fore, rightly or wrongly, through the situation in Hawke's Bay. Is there enough money around in the sector at a time like this to start making those moves that society and consumers are never going to give up on in terms of where they want to see the industry get to on both the environment and animal welfare and, frankly, every other way that they farm within this great umbrella of sustainability as we define it these days?
I think as an industry, we can't afford not to do those things. And I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, because actually the practices, the good farming practices that we're talking about, whether it's environmentally or animal welfare or the other aspects, often actually don't cost a lot of money. And I think that's been the other revelation over the last few years, is that in some cases the pressure to reduce expenditure has actually resulted in better environmental outcomes anyway. So it's more about the good farming practice rather than necessarily spending a lot of money. In most cases, there will be exceptions to that. So I think we can see the two go hand in hand, but it is about a more efficient farming and business system overall.
Now, what about red meat? So the Silver Fern Farms deal's gone ahead. There's a little bit of a easing in prices in beef at the moment, I understand. What are you picking for the next sort of 6 to 9 months in that space?
Quite an exciting space in terms of a different landscape with, clearly a new investor in the industry and in the largest processor. So I think that will be watched by everybody. In terms of the production part of the sector, I think it is going to be a relatively difficult 12 months to come, largely due to currency impacts than anything else. And I'm thinking particularly about lamb and sheep meat there, where the devaluation we've seen in the British pound and the relative exchange rate with the euro is putting pressure on those returns, which means probably another difficult season for lamb producers without significantly higher prices, despite the fact that we know lamb numbers are down. And seeing that as the season draws to a close for processing.
Now, while we're talking about the pound, what impact there for our wine industry? Now, wine industry's had a great time in the UK for a number of years, but a significant shift in the currency must surely have an impact somewhere for them.
Yes, it will. I mean, it's been a key market for New Zealand wine for such a long period of time, and currency pressure really across the board is what I would consider to be one of the most difficult and influential factors across all of agribusiness at the present time, whether it's the value against the US dollar or the pound, because those two tend to drive the majority of our export destinations and value. And at the moment, there's a lot of variability in both of those due to either elections or potentially Brexit. So to me, that's a more influential part of returns for producers than actually the demand and supply fundamentals in markets that we see at the moment. Currency will have the last say.
The other issue that's changing, seems to be rapidly, is the whole free trade environment. For a while there, it looked like the world had got its act sorted and we were really going to get behind some of these bigger trade deals, but now some of the wheels look to be falling off. Brexit, of course, makes the whole European space very interesting. TTP, not such a sure thing anymore. The whole situation between Canada and the EU. What can, I guess, primary sectors across, if countries can't get together across everything, what role for primary sectors in terms of helping these deals go forward? Because often they do stumble on the primary sector.
They do, and it's important to continue to, at least if the multilateral agreements can't prevail, then to continue looking at the bilateral agreements. And economic history tells us that we see waves of regulation and then deregulation. And of course, the global economy has ridden a wave of globalization for the last several decades. And I think we're now seeing popular politics see more of a a nationalistic approach, which tends to mean that globalisation has not gone away, certainly not, and I don't think it will with technology, but it does mean it's much more difficult to get a multilateral deal done. And therefore, doing the deals that we can do becomes important. And I think that's still important for the primary sector to get behind those, where those opportunities are. And it's not lost on me that Prime Minister Key is in India at the moment, because clearly those sorts of trade deals with those growing, very large emerging nations will be important to our ongoing primary sector success.
Lastly, Hayley, what role for the banks in this environment where people have got to look very hard at perhaps changing their production system, recognising that growth won't come forever, maybe they should look into a different land use, maybe there's more volatility in the markets they should be looking at, or what their product mix looks like, or who they're dealing through. What role for the banks in terms of, I guess, steadying the ship at an uncertain time for many?
Yeah, really being that trusted advisor, providing a sounding board as people are reviewing their business decisions and business outlook, and being one of those groups of people that, whether it's alongside an accountant or a farm consultant or another rural professional, that can provide that suggestion, perhaps a different idea, but certainly a well-considered critique, which often is what people inside the business can struggle to see. So a really valued sounding board is the role that I would hope to see banks play.
Sounds good. Look, Hayley, thank you very much for your time today. Always interesting to round things up with you. We'll look forward to I think it's coming out very shortly, the latest Rural Confidence Survey.
Yes, there will be another one out certainly before the end of the year. Always a pleasure. Thank you, Roger.
This interview was brought to you in association with Rabobank.